Hi, Gary Spearman. It's time for another Prophecy in the News daily update. It is November the 1st, and guess what? There is war in the Middle East. Maybe this comes as a surprise to you, but it shouldn't. We'll talk about that in a moment. First, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 3, "For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape." You know, there is a general cry for peace and safety in the Middle East right now, but at the same time, we're in the fourth day of a relatively dense missile attack from Gaza. It's been called the Jihad missile attack, and I'm reading here from Debka File, Sunday morning, October the 30th. Jihad Islami denied any knowledge of a truce Egypt called for 0600 Sunday morning. By 0700 hours, it had launched 11 Grad missiles and 2 mortar rounds from the Gaza Strip at Ashdod, Gan Yavne, Lahalavim, Ashkelon, Kiryat Malachi, Kiryat Malachi, as we might say in English, Rahat, and Shear HaNegev on the second day of its massive assault. Several Israeli cities in central and southern Israel are being hit by Grad missiles. And mind you, this is the second day of an offensive that's now in its fourth day. Saturday night, after more than 35 Palestinian missiles, most of them the heavy Grad missiles, had battered 8 Israeli towns, Egyptian sources reported Israel and the Palestinian organizations of the Gaza Strip had accepted a truce that would start 0600 last Sunday morning. Well, such a truce never started, and the missile barrages continue. 6 missiles last Saturday night had hit Beersheba, Lahavim, Shear HaNegev, and Ashkelon. Israeli airstrikes struck back at 6 Palestinian terrorist targets, but still the Grad missiles come. Number one, the Jihad Islami, which takes its orders and its funding from Iran, by the way, will ignore the ceasefire and redouble its missile strikes against Israel. So reports Debka File. Number two, Jihad will decide whether or not to continue its attacks depending on its orders from Damascus and Tehran rather than Cairo. And I think you're beginning to see what I meant when I said a minute ago there's war in the Middle East. And these news reports just continue to come out of the Middle East. Palestinian missiles pound southern Israel for the third day. This one is dated October 31st. That's yesterday as I'm making this. The missiles are flying. Beersheba, Ashkelon, Sderot were under missile attacks Monday and Tuesday from the Grad missiles that we've been talking about that are coming out of Gaza. Schools have been closed in Israel, and there's no plan to open them because it's just not safe for the kids to go to school. After a decade of missile violence from Gaza, the people still living there are saying enough is enough. They are fed up with being told that the military and the powers that be know best how to handle the terrorism from the Gaza Strip. The missiles start flying whenever it pleases the Gazan Palestinians. And by the way, it has virtually all but halted settlement growth in central and southern Israel. Why has this continued to happen? In other words, why do the Palestinians feel free to fire rockets at Israel? Number one, according to this report, there have been conflicting statements from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the army chiefs. First they say one thing and then they say another. They have not issued a clear ultimatum. Number two, an Egyptian brokered ceasefire was announced as going into effect last Sunday morning, and it just fell flat. No one paid any attention to it whatsoever. Number three, Israel's famous Iron Dome anti-missile operation has failed recently on several cases, allowing missiles to come through what should have been the Iron Dome shield and hit their ground targets. So people are becoming very, very frightened about the possibility of avoiding those rocket attacks. The Palestinians are becoming more and more excited about the success of their missile launches. Number 4, there was a brief television appearance in Israel by Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Benny Gantz, who, when pressed by the interviewer, refused to say what Israel will do in response to the rocket attacks. All he would say is, "We shall do what needs to be done." And that is the most definitive statement that came out of the Israeli high command. So there is really grave doubt on both sides as to what Israel's official policy is. From the Gazan perspective, this is wonderful. From the Israeli view, not so good. Last Sunday, the lack of clarity was enunciated on several fronts by people who really began to wonder, what are Israel's intentions as regards the Gazan missile strikes? Item 6, Monday morning of this week, dawned with no sign that the radical Jihad Islami had intended to hold back its missile barrages. And in fact, there was every sign that a new round of missile attacks would continue. And community leaders in Israel are making preparations on their own without government help. And they fear that the attacks are just simply going to grow greater and greater as time goes by. Indeed, peace and safety is the cry in the Middle East. And there is no peace and safety. Instead, there is a continuation of rocket attacks from Gaza and the threat of rocket attacks from Syria. Psalm 91 is a directive to Israel in the latter days, and it says, "He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty." And you know, if I were those settlers in central and south Israel, I think I'd be looking at Psalm 91 rather carefully these days. Verse 2 says, "I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress. In Him will I trust." Verse 3 says, "He shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence." Verse 4, "He shall cover thee with His feathers, and under His wings shalt thou trust. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler." Verse 5, "Thou shalt not be afraid of the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day." You know, a lot of people have looked long and hard at Psalm 91, and they have said, you know, that arrow that flieth by day, that pestilence that walks in darkness, that pestilence, and it has every sign of being fulfilled in the modern missile barrages that are now coming out of Gaza and are threatened, of course, out of Lebanon, out of Syria, and as far north as Turkey. The arrow that flieth by day. Verse 6 goes on to say, "Nor for the pestilence that walketh in darkness, nor for the destruction that wasteth at noonday. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee." And this psalm has been a comfort over the years to many. I remember in Operation Desert Storm, when our troops went back in 1991 to cover the attacks by Saddam Hussein at that time on Kuwait, they all reported that Psalm 91 was the psalm they continually turned to for comfort, because they really knew what it was like to experience the arrow that flies by day. Well, we're watching the Middle East. There's no peace there. Everybody's crying out peace and safety. But instead what they get is flying rockets. And by the way, they are the heavy Grad rockets. They are not the little feeble Katyushas that the Palestinians were firing for so many years. Gary Spearman, watch the Middle East, because that's where it's happening today. And by the way, keep looking up.